it's dangerous, look!
After 25 years of not ending, a long-running time travel series was coming to an end, except nobody at the time knew that it was ending, which was based mainly on the fact that it had so far gone 25 years and not ended. Yet here we are, after 26 years, suddenly, boom, nothing, nada, zip.
Your words are strange, but that is the meaning, yes.
Doctor Who, Season 26.
What is he doing here?
Not a lot.
Season 26 of Doctor Who ran for 14 25-minute episodes in late 1989, and as we know now,
Remember, we are in the future.
was the end of the original run of the series, a show that had run every year since 1963. As far as anybody knew going into Season 26, it would just be another year of the show. It was an innocent time where the only stumbling block to a Season 27 was that you first had to make a Season 26.
I've got to find out what's going on.
However, at the highest echelons of the BBC, also known as the top floor, or the place to be if you wanted to empty your coffee cups out the window and not have anybody else's dirty coffee emptied on you, moves were afoot to look for a way to keep the show running, but made in a different way. Things didn't go to plan, and as such, this would be the end, but the moment had not been prepared for.
Do you not ride the ship of time? Does it not deceive the senses, being larger within than without?
Season 25 in 1988 had seen the show pull out of its hiatus-induced creative slump.
It's knackered, isn't it?
Yes, I fixed it.
Sylvester McCoy had course-corrected his portrayal of the Doctor to make him less goofy and more serious, and he'd built a fantastic rapport between his Doctor and Sophie Aldred as Ace.
Oh, Professor!
This Doctor was more brooding and less comfortable with his immense power, while Ace is less of a companion and more of an apprentice.
Parading your shameless wantons in front of your guests.
Does he mean me, Professor?
John Nathan Turner had been the show's producer since 1980, where this would be his 9th season of the show. He'd already cast 3 Doctors and had already asked to move on several times, but reluctantly stayed as it had been implied that if he left, Doctor Who would be no more. By this stage, he had perhaps learned enough to stay away from the creative side and leave that to his script editor and the writers.
Open up! It's me!
Script editor Andrew Cartmel had wrangled the writers of the show more successfully than some of his predecessors. The result was a season that didn't seem to be just more of the same, where people ran up and down corridors and then stood deathly still so a video effect could be added. The stories would turn the companion from an ankle-twisting engine to an actual character. The Doctor, who'd had so much of his backstory revealed in the 70s and 80s, would be implied to be more than just a Time Lord who went joyriding with a time machine. Now, the Doctor was there at the start of the Time Lord civilization.
And didn't we have trouble with the prototype?
We?
They.
But the idea was to merely hint at the Doctor's history and power rather than reveal too much. Otherwise, you'd be back to square one with too much information.
I think I would have noticed a nuclear explosion.
Yes, well, they are conspicuous.
The 4 tales of the 1989 series would be more ambitious with the type of stories they told. Season 26 would push the show further into the realms of fantasy and mythology, but with a science fiction wrapper. Look, I often push into the realms of fantasy when I'm looking for a new car to handle my morning commute.
What should we worry about?
Sorcery.
Season 26 is a good, solid season of the show with one absolutely excellent story, one very good one, a mostly solid story, and a slightly less consistent story that's still highly watchable. There are problems, of course, but the most glaring one is often in the editing. In one story there's perhaps too little, and in 2 stories with far more complicated stories than was usual in Doctor Who, the editing is intense. Editing episodes during post-production to fit the time slot tends to exacerbate issues in the sometimes overstuffed scripts, where you get the impression of stories being lumbered with too many characters and plot threads. Characters walk into a room, have angry conversations with antagonists, then walk out halfway with the viewer hoping in vain that they'll finish that thread before it's been forgotten about.
Must be terrible not knowing.
A lot of classic Doctor Who does work best if you watch them an episode or 2 at a time, but these stories almost need to be watched in one sitting if you have any desire to understand what's going on. Also, it helps to take notes. Me, I tend to hire a stenographer when watching Season 26 stories, just so I have a record of what's going on.
Do we take notes?
Part of the issue is in that writing better characters that aim to be more than just cardboard stereotypes advancing the plot, there just wasn't the time to appreciate them. There's less breathing room than in a frunk. Some of the stories would later have re-edited versions that will greatly improve the flow of scenes, and for this review, this is one of the few times where we would prefer the special editions over the original versions, particularly for Battlefield and Curse of Fenric. There is an extended version of Ghostlight, but that involves adding scenes from much lower quality sources, so I still tend to stick with the television version. And then I will consult with a panel of experts to ascertain what the hell was going on.
Don't worry, I always leave things to the last moment.
Production values this season have mostly taken a pretty major step up, and this season has some of the best creature designs and makeup effects that the series would ever produce. It's a shame about the cat. There are all new villains and creatures, and there's one familiar foe returning. You won't guess who it is, and when you finally do work out who it is, you'll be totally shocked. I shan't tell you, but I wish I could see the look on your face when you realise, oh god, it's the Master again.
We shall become animals.
For some statistics, Season 26 was made up of a pair of 4-part stories and 2 3-parters. 2 of those stories were made on location using outside broadcast equipment, and one was a mix of studio and location, and the last one was completely studio bound. Now if you add all of that up, multiplied by the angle of attack and then divide by the square root of the hypotenuse, and then press clear on your FX82B, you will end up with the answer you seek.
Do not stand against me this time, for your soul's sake.
By the late 80s, more and more BBC dramas were being shot on film for that extra level of polish. Doctor Who was not a member of that club. In fact, it was explicitly banned from that club and had to sit next door at another, cheaper club, and even then Doctor Who sat at the kids' table with all the soaps and sitcoms.
I get the urge to bung half a kilo of TNT down the hole and bring it all up in one go.
To kick off a season that would really push the envelope of 80s Doctor Who, we start off with Battlefield, a story that's quite traditional in some ways, but it will also push the show towards fantasy. It is the story with a lot of pew pew pew, so if that's your main criterion for enjoying something, then you're in luck. Responding to a distress signal, the TARDIS lands near Lake Vortigern a few years into Ace's future. There's an archaeological dig, there's a nearby pub, a young woman who shares Ace's interest in high explosives, a unit detail transporting a nuclear missile. And if all of that weren't enough, which apparently it isn't, some space knights arrive to have a space knight battle. A really, really slow space knight battle.
It looked like a bloke.
Bloke, flying through the air.
And then through a wall.
This is to be the site of Morgaine's final battle with her old nemesis Merlin, who all of the space knights seem to think bears an uncanny resemblance to the Doctor. I mean, they don't card him or anything, he just has this Merlin-y vibe. UNIT's current CEO, Brigadier Bambera, is finding out about UNIT's history with weird stuff when she's confronted first by the Doctor and then a surfer dude with long hair dressed as a knight. And finally, her predecessor, Brigadier Lethbridge Stewart. He's been recalled to action, though his helicopter is forced down and his pilot murdered by Morgaine. The Doctor and Ace find an entrance to the underwater spaceship, which also seems to hold the desiccated remains of King Arthur. Ace removes Excalibur and unleashes a green space eel that attacks the Doctor while she's briefly trapped in a tube rapidly filling with water. Ace turns out to be the Lady of the Lake, and the Doctor has a reunion with one of his oldest friends, and no, it's not Spartacus.
Brigadier Alistair Gordon Lethbridge Stewart.
Here, Morgaine, her clingy son Mordred, and one of their enemies, Ancelin, are from, well, it's a different dimension, where they're all set to wage a massive battle on Earth. Morgaine summons the ancient demon, the Destroyer, which is still one of the most impressive monsters ever seen on Doctor Who. Well, it's one of the most impressive things ever seen standing still and not actually doing all that much. But still, really cool. While writer Ben Aranovic's script from the previous season was one of the show's best in the 1980s, Battlefield is a show that tries to give Arthurian legend a science fiction spin involving knights and swords and laser weapons, a demonic creature and unit. The story itself is fine, but the production seems to be the least effective of the season. Any action scenes involving the knights just feel sluggish and amateurish, like we're watching live action role playing first thing in the morning before anybody's had a cup of coffee. For such a story with so much action, the multi-camera setup really works against any of these battle scenes. It's going for epic, but like Rocky's omelette, is quite underdone. The editing of these scenes is rather limited, resulting in a sluggish pace that's at odds with the same director's tightly made Dalek story last season. A lot of the sluggishness has been improved in the special edition from many years later, and it at least feels a lot less LARPy.
What are you doing in the lake? Drowning. Here you can be King of England.
Jean Marsh, the creator of Upstairs Downstairs and a former Mrs. John Pertwee, had appeared in Doctor Who twice in the 60s, where one of the characters she played was the short-lived and doomed companion Sarah Kingdom, whose on-screen brother was also played by Nicholas Courtney. Morgaine is evil, but never quite cartoonishly evil thanks to Marshall's performance.
Let this be our last battlefield.
Her being talked out of setting off a nuke by the Doctor gave Sylvester McCoy an opportunity to give one of his Doctor's finest speeches.
No more tears, only ashes.
Angela Bruce was Winifred Bambera, who was first a grumpy warrior, and secondly, a lady looking for love with a space knight from another dimension. Bambera and Anselin's constant hand-to-hand flirting gives the story a lot of its comedic moments.
Good morning.
The Brigadier is now married to Doris, somebody who'd been mentioned once by a psychic and implied to be the Brig's old girlfriend.
She said it was to mark her gratitude to
Yes,
you.
all true, absolutely spot on.
When we saw the Brigadier in 1983, he'd been living in a campus bungalow, teaching in a school, and now he's married, living in this giant country house. You see, sometimes those photos really do come in handy. Nicholas Courtney slips back into character very easily, and this time the Brigadier isn't quite the old stick in the mud who's totally unwilling to countenance the existence of monsters and time travel. Here, he's confronted by demons and characters from legend, and doesn't bat an eyelid.
I just do the best I can.
However, his military demeanour and propensity to make every conversation an order does rub Ace the wrong way. It is a pity we didn't get more of the Brigadier and Ace interacting.
Ace,
Yes, Brigadier.
I'm getting too old for this sort of thing. He's all yours from now on.
But the relationship between McCoy and Courtney more than makes up for it.
That Brigadier was the beginning of the end of the world.
Same as ever, Doctor.
Bessie also returns, somewhat magically being there at just the right time, and it's clearly had a sound system upgrade.
Gordon Bennett.
Battlefield ended up as the only story this year to mix outside broadcast location work with studio footage. The sets look quite decent for the era.
And I have an ace up my sleeve.
There's one curious scene set in the TARDIS console room, where it's the only time we had seen inside the time machine this season, but only the console prop was used. The usual console room set wasn't used in favour of simpler set pieces. The reasons differ from account to account, but basically the TARDIS interior walls were apparently damaged the previous season and then junked. I mean, some of the things you'd find in skips in West London.
Yeah, fascinating.
Battlefield's production was marred by an incident on set where the water tank in which Ace was trapped began bulging and cracking during recording, leading to Sophie Aldred being quickly removed from danger before the cable-strewn studio floor was flooded. Aldred was thankfully unhurt, helped by McCoy having raised the alarm that something was amiss. Also, the behind-the-scenes footage of this incident is also about 34% more interesting than the finished program. Battlefield was the one story that bridged the previous style of Doctor Who and the fantasy push of this season. It's also the story that retains the slightly cheap and sloppy feel of how people remember Doctor Who. It does have a lot of characters, but at least uses the better ones more and keeps some of the smaller roles in the background. The Destroyer is an absolutely excellent monster. It's a fantastic creation. We think, we're not really sure, but since we don't get to see all that much of him, it's just a pity that they didn't do more with him before killing him off.
I think the battle may be about to begin.
Battlefield is a story that could have been better and should have been better. Unfortunately, it just turns out to be just alright.
Merlin, you fool.
The rest of the season's stories will each feature Ace facing something from her past.
You tricked me!
Ghostlight is a story attempting to present a gothic horror set in a haunted house, but one without any gore or explicitly gruesome deaths. It is very Hammer-esque, and if you had the likes of Peter Cushing or Christopher Lee as well as at least a half a bucket of blood, you'd get the idea. The Doctor and Ace arrive in a Victorian-era household and find some odd things happening. There's a big game hunter who's lost his mind, a priest come to remonstrate with the house's resident Josiah Smith over his embrace of the theory of evolution. There are some serious staff turnover issues. The day shift can't get out of there fast enough, while the graveyard shift seem like they're taking night school courses on vampiric stoicism. Josiah Samuel Smith himself shows up, but this is not a story with easy answers. The plot unfolds a bit at a time, but as Ghostlight was one of the stories where the script was just too big to fit into 3 25-minute episodes, the story, which is set up to be revealed like peeling an onion layer by layer, instead ends up as a plate of diced onions mixed up with the carrots. In Ghostlight, we again have people wandering into rooms to have half a conversation, then wandering off into another room to finish the other half of the conversation from earlier on. If you're lucky, they may eventually finish the conversation, but there's no guarantee. Ghostlight is the story that's most likely to baffle you on your first, your second, your third, even your fourth viewing. I have seen it way more than that, and it only starts to make a sense at times, but then it wants to throw more things at you. And the only way I came to understand the underlying story is watching the script editor try and explain the setup and the DVD extras. Now, when you have to have the value-added content to get the gist of the basic story, then there is clearly a problem. And also, while I have no memory of hitting my head, I must have, judging by the fresh bandages. That's how it feels when you finally understand what's going on here.
Wicked.
As far as I can tell, Light had come to Earth to catalogue every species with assistance from Control and a being that would continue to evolve, where he ultimately would become Josiah Samuel Smith. By the late 1800s, Smith had taken over Gabriel Chase, the family home of the Pritchards, and set himself up as the Lord of the Manor, King of the Castle, and, as it was the Victorian era, Master of his domain. It's not a particularly safe place to stay, with a very high probability of gruesome death, though Gabriel Chase does at least have ample parking. Here, a priest who decried the theory of evolution devolves into an ape. Inspector Mackenzie meets a grisly and indeed grisly fate.
The cream of Scotland Yard.
Gwendolyn and her mother are turned to stone. Everybody's being sent to Java, and it's a one-way flight. Thankfully, there are no stopovers, but unfortunately, the in-flight movie is Nights in Rodanthe.
We all have a universe of our own terrors to face.
Smith had decided that he wanted to take over the British Empire and conspired with Hunter Redfers Van Cooper to assassinate Queen Victoria. Well, after watching Ghostlight several times, I have worn a groove in my scalp from all that head scratching.
Oh, things are getting out of control. Even I can't play this many games at once.
Normally, the timing of scripts is judged by how many pages there are, and then the production personnel will read it and time it with a stopwatch. That process clearly didn't work for Ghostlight, where, despite having more than enough material for 4 episodes, that would have involved paying some cast and crew for another episode. Instead, the story was condensed, with some scenes cut or shortened during recording and others trimmed during post-production. Now, the editing is not the only reason why it's a hard story for some to get into, but it sure didn't help. Ghostlight was a 4-episode story wearing a pair of jeans meant to fit 3 episodes, and the result was, well, uncomfortable for everybody.
You have to complete the catalogue before you can destroy all life here.
Control decides she wants to be a lady, Redfers Van Cooper decides he's had enough of being mad, Nimrod decides his loyalty is to the Earth, and Light is miffed that evolution has rendered his catalogue pointless and wants to destroy all life on the planet. Look, I sympathise. I thought I had managed to collect every Transformer toy, and then they went and released the Dinobots, so then I got all of them, and then they went and released the Insecticons, so I went and got all of those, and then there was the Combaticons and the Protectobots. And it was at that point I really lost my shit. All through this, Ace has her own history with Gabriel Chase, an abandoned house in her time, which was pervaded by evil so much that young Ace would set fire to it in 1983 after she was angry about her friend's home being firebombed. That's pretty shocking for a Doctor Who companion in the 1980s. I mean, the most rebellious Nyssa ever got was taking a second Kit Kat from the bag in the fridge marked Adric stuff, keep out. Ghostlight's story comes to a head in episode 3 where everything just kicks off. Cooper, Control and the Neanderthal Nimrod take off in Light's ship to catalogue the universe, while I just take some Panadol to deal with the migraine. Ghostlight was part hammer, part escape room, part someone having an acid trip after reading about Charles Darwin. It looks great with fantastic sets and costumes, it's just overloaded with too many interesting characters, each with their own goals.
I wish I'd blown it up instead.
The Curse of Fenric was the first story in production, where originally it was intended to be a mix of studio and location work, but it turned out to be simpler and cheaper to dress a few well-chosen locations than build so many sets. As such, it has a very outside broadcast feel, that slightly soft yet crisp picture. It is staged well, it's acted very well, but boy would this thing have looked so much better with even the grainiest of 16mm film, rather than the grainiest of 1-inch analog videotape. Even so, it has a cinematic feel in a way that so few Doctor Who's of the 80s ever managed to pull off.
We play the contest again. Time.
The Curse of Fenric is set in and around a naval camp in northeast England during the Second World War, where there is the borderline psychotic Commander Millington, the code-breaking genius Professor Judson with his haranguing nurse, a doubt-ridden Reverend Mr. Wainwright, a pair of East End evacuees living with a puritanical old battle axe. To clarify, that's a metaphorical axe. I don't mean the girls were billeted with a medieval weapon of war. There's a wren with her baby daughter, And finally, some Russian commandos led by Captain Soren who are looking to steal something from the Royal Navy. There's an ancient poison that Millington is going to use against the Soviets as he has set up a trap. They'll steal the heart of Judson's code-breaking computer, and eventually the deadly poison will be released when they return to the Soviet Union. Oh, and there's this ancient flask that everybody also seems quite interested in. There's a lot of running in and out of offices, having half a conversation, then running off to another room for a half conversation before storming out to another room to get halfway through a thought before an interruption, where you leave to go to another location before being invited to return to the first office to pick up the thread of an earlier conversation. As we've said, it's not the only story this season to be structured like this, but at least in Fenric, it almost mostly works.
We're wasting our time.
Around halfway through, some things that had been teased at or hinted at will finally show up, because somebody remembered this was Doctor Who and there were supposed to be monsters. So now we have the Hemivores, which are vampires by any other name. Most are blue and misshapen from being undead, but young Phyllis and Jean are their mouthpieces in it. Both actresses, of course, appeared in the long-running children's drama Grange Hill, though history does not record whether Grange Hill's asbestos problem was actually a cover story for the school being overrun with vampires. I shouldn't wonder. Those Hemivores are deadly, but if you'd been on a hike through a mosquito-infested swamp, you might find those long fingernails to be a lifesaver. The Hemivores are kept at bay by faith. Faith in the Bible, faith in the Revolution, Ace's faith in the Doctor, or the Doctor's faith in his companions. Me, I've got faith of the heart. There's the great serpent, the big cheese Hemivore, the ancient one.
My mates call me Tell.
And then there's Fenric himself. Fenric was an ancient evil foe of the Doctor, where Fenric had tried and failed to beat the Doctor at a game, with the Time Lord trapping the evil entity in a flask, and it had been trapped there for 17 centuries. After being released and reanimating Judson's lifeless corpse, Fenric once more tries to beat the Doctor's challenge, which Ace just gives away to Fenric, who now inhabits her almost sweetie Captain Soren. Fenric is not just the enemy for this story, but has been the Doctor's unseen and hitherto unmentioned foe for quite a while, with links to Lady Painfort from Silver Nemesis, and the idea that Fenric was the real cause of Ace being transported from Perivale to Iceworld. Oh, and Kathleen's baby was Ace's mother, the same mother with whom she'd had such a difficult relationship.
I knew she carried the evil inside her. I think I'd have chosen a social misfit if I hadn't known.
The Doctor has to convince Ace that she means nothing to him in order for the Ancient One to kill Fenric. Boom! Zowie! Kashmoj! Curse of Fenric was shown third, but man, this would have been a great final story to end the show on. It was written by Ian Briggs as a World War II set vampire story, but JNT wasn't keen on any potential controversy, and so most mentions of vampires were changed to Hemivores, which does translate to blood eaters. Of course, don't mistake The Curse of Fenric with my own fanfiction story, Curse of Fenric, which was a spec script where nobody was able to read the Doctor's handwriting.
My handwriting.
McCoy's two young sons played mini-Hemivores. Marek Anton, who played Destroyer in Battlefield, shows up as one of the Russians. Nicholas Parsons was mainly known in the UK as a presenter and game show host, but he started off as an actor, where he'd much earlier been the voice of Tex Tucker in one of the earliest puppet series from Jerry Anderson, Four Feather Falls.
Now don't nobody move.
The rest of the guest cast, some of whom were quite well known in Britain, such as Dinsdale Landon, were also excellent in their roles. Even a show apparently in the doldrums still managed to cast good actors.
Go! Go!
Doctor Who as a television format was the sort of thing that could in theory run forever, but by the late 80s seemed to be in its not so golden years for many lapsed viewers and even some fans.
Thank you for being a friend. Travel down the road and back again. Your heart is true. You're a pal and a confidant. And if you threw a party, invited everyone you knew, you would see the biggest gift would be from me, and the card attached would say, thank you for being a friend.
There was, of course, one more story to the season, but first we should stop and take a look at exactly why Season 26 would end up as the final season of Doctor Who's original run. The answer is a little more complicated than
The babe cancelled it, bruv.
I never thought of it quite that way.
though the effect is pretty much the same. Now, some of this we've talked about in previous videos, but it is all relevant.
Is there a storm coming?
Starting with the most obvious. In the mid-80s, the people who'd bubbled to the top of the drama department and BBC controller positions were people who hated Doctor Who. They were embarrassed by Doctor Who, they found it cheap and nasty. which is despite the fact that they controlled the budgets and who worked on it. This was basically BBC One controller Michael Grade and head of drama Jonathan Powell, who in 1987 would succeed Grade as BBC One controller. In making major changes across the BBC, new programs, daytime television, that sort of thing, Doctor Who was deemed to be past its expiry date and would be cancelled so they could spend the money on other programs.
Excellent.
However, the public furor to cancelling Doctor Who was such that they had to quickly backtrack and sell that cancellation as an 18-month hiatus. Rather than deal with any more bruising backlash, they just cut their losses and did the absolute bare minimum. Season lengths were slashed to 14 episodes at 25 minutes each. The BBC told JNT to change the show's lead actor.
And where is he going?
To Java!
And just keep making the show if he wanted to remain a BBC producer. Also, the BBC would use Doctor Who as a sacrifice to the schedules by putting it up against Coronation Street, one of British television's most watched series. With that sort of competition, Doctor Who was not one of Britain's most watched television series.
Timing!
The idea was that you needed a producer with some momentum and a vision for the show, which is why Russell T Davies was eventually tapped to bring back the show. He wasn't simply handed an assignment. He wanted to do it and had an idea on how to make Doctor Who for a mainstream audience. Back in the late 80s, the company conducted a half-hearted internal search to look for a new producer for the show. Quite possibly they put this on the cover of the Radio Times, ensuring that nobody would ever see it. Science fiction, and Doctor Who in particular, were not popular among the remaining in-house producers and script editors in the drama department, where a lot of them lived in fear of their contemporaries laughing at them. You ideally had highbrow taste, or if you were making crap, it at least had to be very popular crap.
Nothing for you but pitiless damnation for the rest of your lives.
The drama department's shortlist of who might take on Doctor Who: Bigfoot, D.B. Cooper and Lord Lucan. We reached out, but none of them could be reached for comment. Even if a producer had been ready to take on Doctor Who, there was the question of how it would be made, by whom, and who would be paying for it. The BBC was changing. For years, actors, most writers and many directors had been freelance, but now many more roles within the BBC would be staffed that way. Throughout the 90s and beyond, those massive departments that serviced BBC shows would be downsized or disbanded, and in a few cases, both. Producer choice meant a show for the BBC didn't have to be made with BBC resources.
It's now time to shed a little light on your plans.
The idea was that a future series of Doctor Who would also be produced by an outside production company, much like the system used in the US, where the networks licensed programs from studios and distributors rather than making the programs themselves. While we often romanticize the old school way of BBC production, the sorts of programs being made had changed. Writers, actors and directors had always been mostly freelance, and by the end of the next decade so had many people working on BBC shows. While we'd never see what a 1990s Doctor Who would have looked like had it been made by independent producers, we can actually see how it may have benefited the show by looking at how Red Dwarf went from being an in-house BBC production to something produced by an outside company. Red Dwarf's third series saw a massive jump in production values, yet it was made on more or less the same budget as when it was made in-house by the BBC. However, talks with potential outside production partners came to naught.
Doctor, there are some questions better left unanswered.
Doctor Who was reportedly a show that made money for the BBC, either through overseas program sales or from merchandising. So clearly there was a demand for Doctor Who, just so long as it wasn't the BBC footing the bill. Pro tip: don't have lunch with the BBC and expect them to pay for lunch, even though they ordered the wine.
I will be free of it.
Another element was that since at least the 1980s, there'd been talk of a feature film where production company Coast to Coast was still working on a script for a movie in 1989. Also in 1989, the stage musical Doctor Who: The Ultimate Adventure premiered in London. Written by Terence Dix, The Ultimate Adventure featured Cybermen, Daleks, musical numbers. Fancy that. Daleks and musical numbers. It'll never take off. The BBC had hoped that a new independently produced Doctor Who could be ready for screening in 1990, but then that became 1991 and then became 1992 and then it's just nothing.
It's true, isn't it?
The then current head of drama, Peter Cragine, had made the final decision not to make the show for the 1990 season and beyond.
That was the final in this series of Doctor Who. Doctor Who will be back in for another series in early starring as the Doctor.
While the BBC had been secretly thinking about the show's future, producer John Nathan Turner and the production crew had no idea that season 26 would be anything other than just another year of the show. Sylvester McCoy had already been given a new contract for these episodes with an option for another season, and so it was just business as usual. John Nathan Turner would not be officially briefed on the show's future until well after recording it finished, but before the season had completed its broadcast run. Once Survival was broadcast on BBC One, Doctor Who began its indefinite resting, where it wasn't officially cancelled, or at least publicly, but any time the BBC were asked, they would give evasive non-answers. Look, I'm a master of this. The last time I was pulled over for speeding and the officer asked me if I knew how fast I was going, I would say, no, but I know how fast you had to be going in order to catch up to me.
That's what they said. Either you were dead or you'd gone to Birmingham.
Survival would end the season and the series in its original form. The Doctor and Ace return to Perivale, where Ace finds most of her group of friends have either moved away or in recent days disappeared. Also, something is kidnapping people and something is killing cats, and there's this evil looking black cat. It's not evil because it's a black cat, it's evil looking because it's an effect that was one of the few creature effects this season that really didn't work. Speaking of monsters, Hale and Pace appeared as a pair of shopkeepers working on a Sunday.
Don't get it.
Pretty soon, the Doctor and Ace find themselves transported to the desert planet of the Cheetah People. If you stay on this planet, you'll turn into a cat, which has pros and cons. I mean, pro, you have razor-sharp claws for hunting prey. Con, it's a planet where the apex predators are humbled by cucumbers. Ace finds some old friends, Midge and Shrila, as well as another kid, Derek, where Ace tries to organise them to help them survive. Now, the number one rule on a planet populated by cat creatures: do not dig up freshly turned over Earth. The Doctor finds his own office nemesis in a tent, or is that a tent nemesis? It's of course the Master, and he too is being changed by the planet. Violence is having a direct effect on the planet itself, which is tearing itself apart.
But if you do that, you may never change back.
Up to now, Survival has seemed okay with some interesting creatures in the Cheetah People. Ace has started to turn into a cheetah chick and has made friends with Kara, a literal cat lady. But then once we returned to Earth, things derailed faster than the 1015 from Euston Station attempting a handbrake turn. Midge has gone full cat, where under the Master's control he's turned into a motivational speaker at the youth club and will face the Doctor on motorbikes where they'll play chicken and explode, and then Midge dies and the Doctor lands in a pile of rubbish, and then back on the Planète des Chats, the Doctor and the Master get into an all-in brawl.
If we fight like animals, we'll die like animals!
And then back in Perivale, it's all sorted somehow. Huh? Okay, whatever. The Master has control of the Cheetah People with shiny balls, which does date the program since the Master does not use a laser pistol to entertain the Cheetah People. This was writer Rona Munro's first produced Doctor Who script, but it wouldn't be her last, as she'd also write The Eaters of Light many, many years later. She'd be the only person, so far at least, to have written episodes for both versions of Doctor Who.
I've got to catch that cat! You're a public nuisance!
In Survival, the planet of the Cheetah People is never given an on-screen name or a location, but its coordinates can be found just by saying psst, 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 psst. Survival used many of the same production people as Ghostlight, though Survival was entirely shot on location. That suits the grimness of Perivale, and for a change, it works well on the locations, where either the sky was treated with video effects to make it look alien, or the camera crew's white balance card went through the same wash as a load of red socks.
Well, just playing with it.
You're essentially a fun-loving species.
The Master was back, with Anthony Ainley returning for his last television turn as the Doctor's oldest enemy. Just one story after we learned that the Doctor had another oldest enemy. He's been given a new snazzy outfit that will surely be his look for the 90s and... no, that's it.
Thanks, Ace. Thanks, Doctor. Thanks for saving my life and getting me back home.
However, I can't say that I personally find Survival to be a particularly great set of episodes, with the last episode in particular being a lot of things strung together in a way that doesn't make an awful lot of sense to the viewer. Yes, McCoy and Midge playing chicken on a bike is cool. Ace almost turning into a cheetah woman, that's also cool. The Master being a more sedate version of himself, and the contrast between the boring Perivale and the doomed planet that's run out of clumping litter. But it just ends up as a bit of a mess that just seems to, end.
Wretched cats! Get out of my garden! Get out!
The Cheetah People design either works for you or it doesn't. Now, I quite like them, but I can also see how people might mistake them for teddy bears on a picnic. However, those costumes proved quite hot when filming took place in the rarest of rare events, a hot summer in England. One of the Cheetah People actors had enough of the heat or the claustrophobia and ripped off their mask and costume and just ran. A warning for cat lovers, there are more dead cats in this than a sound recordist's backpack. The kittling was a rare effect this season that didn't work as well as was hoped. The animatronic puppet appeared on screen much longer than was intended, thanks to real cats proving to behave like real cats. I mean, what were the odds of that?
Flipping cats.
Real cat actors were supposed to be used more often, except real cat actors are egotistical, lazy, and unwilling to take direction, which, truth be told, is why I was asked to leave my high school's production of Cats. Now, what made that particularly galling was I wasn't actually in the cast, I was in the audience. If I've bought a ticket, I'm gonna heckle.
Are you really fed up?
For this season, there were 4 stories that were not the sort of thing that I liked as a teenager, but they have grown on me as I age out of caring about which Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle would be most fun to hang out with.
Is he making all the right moves? Or only going through the motions?
Sophie Aldred as Ace proved to be one of the greatest companions of the 80s, where she was more than just somebody who got into trouble and asked questions. McCoy had come on leaps and bounds since his first season.
There will be no battle here!
He was one of my 50 doctors growing up, but there's still one thing that whenever he gets really animated, his facial expressions go a bit over the top.
Go before I unleash a terrible something on you.
However, when he's quiet and calm, the level of authority and menace increases exponentially. With McCoy's Doctor, he's absolutely at his best when you don't have to turn the sound down. Season 26 was, in many ways, a bridge between the original series and the post-2005 series, in the way, say, that the companions are treated and how it tries to get away from being a cosy middle-class fantasy version of England.
When they fight each other, they trigger explosions.
Curse of Fenric is still an all-time classic. Ghostlight is almost brilliant, or would be if it hadn't been a 4-parter cosplaying as a 3-parter. Battlefield had a more straightforward story that seemed to be screaming for the single-camera treatment, a story that some tightening of action scenes does work wonders with. And then there was Survival, which was the most easy to follow, at least until the last episode, which wasn't a terrible story, but it was not an amazing place to end the series.
Now at last, I have the power to destroy you.
The editing to the bone of Fenric and Ghostlight for a fixed broadcast time slot did remove a lot of the texture of those stories.
Peace!
Perhaps these stories just would have worked much better as novels than something that was supposed to work in a 25-minute episode format.
I was so mad and I needed to get away.
There was no official announcement at the time that Doctor Who had come to an end. John Nathan Turner had tweaked the ending to Survival by having McCoy come back to record his dialogue to Ace, which hopefully gave some very small sense of closure.
Some of there's danger, some of there's injustice, and somewhere else the tea's getting cold.
Which does seem like escaping from your burning house, but making sure you lock the front door on the way out.
Empty spaces, what are we living for? Abandoned places, I guess we know the score. On and on, does anybody know what we are looking for? Show must go on. Show must go on. Yeah. Inside my heart is breaking. My makeup may be flaking, but my smile still stays on.
Home.
Home?
The TARDIS.
Yes.
The 1990s would be slightly Doctor Who free, but not entirely Doctor Who free. Throughout the decade, there would be more merchandise than before, including a vastly increased rate of home video releases, where almost every existing story would be available to buy on VHS. Fans of Betamax, however, could just piss off. You made your bed, now lie in it. There were new adventures in books and comics. Doctor Who magazine would continue to be published long after they stopped printing hopium about a new season, and then there was the promise, or possibly threat, of an American-backed series in some form. That would result in a television movie pilot in 1996, but of course, all of this is a story for another time. Doctor Who would eventually be back as a weekly series in 2005, and if you'd have told me that going into 1990, I'd have probably needed medical assistance.
You are coming back, aren't you?
If you enjoyed this review, please like and subscribe, leave a comment below, or check out some of our other videos.
Half-time score. Perivale 600 million. Rest of the universe, nil.